I was browsing the interwebs a few days ago when I found this article about a Danish artist called Jens Haaning. Haaning was paid around 876,000 Danish kroner, roughly equivalent to 84,000 US dollars, to create a piece for the Kunsten Museum of Modern Art in Aalborg, Denmark. What the Kunsten Museum got in return was a blank canvas entitled "Take the Money and Run" that was supposedly a commentary on poor wages. The Kunsten Museum was, unsurprisingly, not very pleased about this trade. $84,000 for literally a blank piece of paper. However, and here's the kicker, the museum put up the canvas and displayed it for the entirety of its exhibition's existence. 4 months. Clearly, this empty frame meant something to the guests of the museum, or else it wouldn't have been kept around for that long. Which means the question is this blank canvas a piece of art? Well, let's figure it out. Art has always existed in that nebulous haze of near undefinable concepts that we humans don't like to think about too often lest we get confused and argumentative. Rule Britannica tells us, broadly, that art is something beautiful that is created with skill and that expresses ideas and emotion. Oxford tells us that it is the use of imagination to express ideas, usually in a visual capacity. Merriam-Webster tells us that it is merely acquired skill via observation and study without really giving us a concrete answer. And the first result in Google is happy to inform us that art is the expression or application of human creative skill and imagination, typically in a visual form, such as painting or sculpture, producing works to be appreciated primarily for their beauty or emotional power. All of these definitions are delightfully ambiguous, which is good for people like us who want to analyze enigmatic abstractions accurately, and also shows just how divisive people are over art, both their own art and others. One thing all these definitions have in common, excluding Merriam-Webster, which just sends you into an infinitely looping snobbery spiral disguised as a rabbit hole, is that art is emotional in some way. The artist behind it is creating the art with some emotional intent guiding their way, or else the viewer of the art is emotionally reacting to that artwork, viscerally or otherwise. Of course, this can't be our only defining property of art. If our parameters were this wide, things like family and friends could be considered art, and while that is certainly a way to interpret the word, it's far too uncommon to be considered standard practice, and probably not what you wanted when you clicked on this video. So, another thing consistent amongst all but one of our definitions, you know who you are, is the use of creative process to create the artwork in question. And generally, this means that a lot of time was taken thinking over exactly what the piece is meant to convey and how it will be executed. This, paired with our last defining factor, gives us a cleaner and narrower definition of art. Artwork is anything created via human imagination that either conveys emotion or was inspired by emotion. A lot of things we people call art can now be meaningfully sorted into one category or the other. The Mona Lisa? Definitely art. Da Vinci clearly went through some creative process to produce that piece, and the modern populace still tells tales of the profound impact that it's allegedly had on them. The Starry Night? Well, that's art as well, for the same reasons as mentioned above. Which means that now we can answer our question, is Take the Money and Run art? It clearly didn't take much creative input from its maker, and it hasn't made some meaningful splash in the art world, causing critics worldwide to cry out about the effects the piece has had on them. The most emotional interactions anybody's had with Haaning's work has been laughing at it. So, no, using the definition curated above, Take the Money and Run is not art. But then again, it was shown in an art museum for upwards of a fifth of a year, so surely there's something artistic about it, right? So let's now talk about something I've neglected to tell you about up until this point. The importance of intent in a piece. Yes, something may very well be considered art if it's imaginative and evocative, but if there's no intent behind the piece, if it was not made with the intention of being art, then it's not. Intentfulness is very important in artwork, and it can almost always trump any other definition we can scrape together. So, Take the Money and Run is art then, because Haaning made it as a piece of art to be displayed in an art museum. Clearly, the Kunsten Museum didn't like it, but they asked for modern art, and if modern art is all about the artist identifying their work as art, then this is 100% certifiably art. But, and bear with me here, let's posit the hypothetical notion that Haaning, when asked to turn in his modern art homework, gives the Kunstmuseum a beautifully sewn quilt. Is that art? I mean, it doesn't fit the standard vague definition of art, and it wasn't intended to be art. A blanket is, after all, a survival tool at its very core. Or, even more hypothetically, let's say Haaning and his wife show up and act out a stage play every day for the 4 months that the exhibition is on display. Is that art? The arts are an ill-defined category of ideas, but generally they can be broken down into 2 main groups, which themselves can be broken down into smaller groups. The fine arts, which are things like painting, sculpting, and architecture, and the performance arts, which are things like singing, writing, and acting. It's a broad category of subjects that are thankfully easier to define than just art itself. The artworks we've been discussing up until this point, things like The Starry Night and Mona Lisa, are classified under fine arts because they're paintings. The other branch of arts, the performance arts, clears up a lot of other questions by confirming that yes, Taylor Swift makes art, and yes, video making like this is an art form if I want it to be. It even answers the stage play question. But what about the quilt? And so now we're going to dive into yet another definition of art. Art is any activity or product produced by people with a communicative or aesthetic purpose. This one ticks all our boxes, I think. Every single one of these artworks fits under the art umbrella with this definition, even the quilt. But you'll see when we combine these definitions we've come up with, we get nothing short of a mess. According to today's research, art is an emotionally evocative product of the creative process and the artist's passion, created with the artistic intent to communicate an idea or just look pleasing to the eye. I hope you've noticed the problem here too, my friend. The definition of art we've just come up with is nothing mind-boggling, and that's because by adding more requirements, we've somehow ended up with an infinitely larger collection of things that could feasibly be considered art. That airplane over there? It's art. That nail polish stained carpet you trot across every day? Art. The computer with which I am writing this video script? Art. It's difficult, isn't it? Because art can really only be described as being art to whoever engages with it. There's no good way to contain the word in some neat little box like we can with other fields of study. Art is just art. And so now, looking at Jens Haaning's Take the Money and Run, we may ask ourselves once again, is this art? I don't know. Is it?